Hi there, and thanks for attending our webinar on Sam Compass from Method 180, along with our good friends over at Asset Labs. So here's what you're going to get out of this webinar today. We're going to talk a little bit about Microsoft inventory, how you collect inventory, how you reconcile it. If you've ever had the task of actually collecting Microsoft inventory, you'll understand that there's a lot of um, complexity that goes into that. There's a lot of noise. I mean, you could pull inventory data for somebody that's got 500 or so users and end up with tens of thousands of rows of data. So we're going to talk about inventory reconciliation and how to automate that, how to visualize the data so you can look at it and figure out how best to license it, how to use the Asset Labs tool to assign licenses and track the use of those licenses, as well as the impact over time and how the changes in your deployment will actually impact licensing over time. So what are you going to be able to do with what you learned today? You're going to be able to determine the steps to get a deployment picture for your Microsoft inventory, how to use your own tool, whether that's a tool like SCCM or Alteryx, or a free tool such as the Microsoft Map tool, or maybe even potentially even combine a couple of different tools if you need to in order to get the complete data picture of your inventory. We're going to show you how you can use this tool to visualize any areas where you're over and under license real quick. That'll allow you to reset licenses and optimize for future deployments or prepare and budget for any annual true ups that are coming up, and figure out exactly just how many licenses you need to place for your true up. And then, we're also going to give you a little bit of an understanding of how virtual server deployments and how those map to host servers and clusters to give you a way to visualize your server deployment to figure out the licensing on those products. So who are your presenters today? Myself, I'm Mike Austin, I'm the VP of Delivery here at Method 180. If you want to send me any questions, you can reach me at mike@method180.com. And I've got my good friend Steve O'Halloran, who's the VP of Business Development over at Asset Labs. You can reach Steve at assetlabs.com. So Steve, over to you. Let's get started here.
Here we have the interface for Asset Labs, and basically it's actually more of a resource dashboard. When you're first starting off with Asset Labs in your account, most of the data will be absent as far as your vendor composition or your top Microsoft auditable, as well as your devices, they'll be empty. But down in the lower left-hand corner, you'll have access to the resources to collect the data. And that is using Microsoft Map as an option, and critically using the Echo tool. Let me just hide that. Which is basically the ambassadorial gateway application. It is the interface between your network management data, whether it be from SCCM, Flexera, Landsweeper, Microsoft Map, or otherwise, and to your secure Asset Labs account. We'll talk about that later. Once the data is in, your dashboard and all of your reports become populated. And all the reports are online. And along the top, you will have various dashboards available, tools, and reports. The reports are everything that your guests and your administrators in your account can use. And the reports are separated into what we like to call good, bad, and ugly. These are what we like to call the good reports. These are line of business reports, and you'll be spending the majority of your time in these reports, and more specifically, probably in the Microsoft and Adobe auditable. We'll get to that in a minute. The bad are the end user distractions. And due to the fact that the Asset Labs service will categorize and normalize nearly every single software title that it finds in order to identify, as an example, components and device drivers and hotfixes from utilities and licensable applications. It will also identify things that are outside the scope of licensing but may have a SAM context that's important to you, such as identifying end user distractions, peer-to-peer applications, games, actual malware, and software that is probably more intended for personal use or home. So though this doesn't have a huge licensing aspect, it does deal with the risk aspects of corporate branding and corporate productivity. And so again, that just comes out in the wash by being able to identify everything, because we need to in order to separate auditable from non-auditable. These come out in the wash.
So
Yeah.
let me ask
Mhm.
you just a couple of quick questions about um, the dashboard in general. Sorry, I probably cut
Yes.
you off as you were going to talk about all installs, but I'll let I'll let you come back to that. Um,
Okay.
so I'm going to assume this customer has loaded their inventory in either through, say, MAP or SCCM or Altiris or some other
Yeah.
network management tool. And the
Or all
asset
three.
lab, yeah, the asset lab service has taken inventory from one or multiple sources and combined them in. And so when this customer logs in, are we saying that they have 2,075 desktops and 144 servers? Is that,
Mhm.
the service itself is intelligent enough to take that inventory and declare those counts, basically instantaneous? Is that what?
Pretty well instantaneously. If instantaneously means plus or minus 5 or 10 minutes, the answer is yes.
Okay.
Right? So that's, or maybe get a cup of coffee time span. But yes, within a matter of minutes, all of the software, all of the hardware, and all of the categorization and normalization of what we'll call mutated or rogue software titles is all cleaned up and absolutely ready to go. Uh,
Awesome. And so I can also kind of see if you just collapse the menu for a quick second, like I
mhm.
can also see real quickly that this isn't just a Microsoft tool. So it looks like we can tell that, they have Microsoft, Semantic, Intel, Adobe, and others
Yes.
here. And I would assume that this is not the exhaustive list of vendors that these guys have. This is just the, top 10 or something there that you
Oh, yeah. Yes, that's the top 10. Yeah. So the system is agnostic with respect to, well, it doesn't necessarily favor Microsoft or Adobe. It just deals with the volume of data. And what you're seeing here on the business apps, and this is what we'll call the top 10 or the Pareto curve or the long tail. Classically, most of your software titles will be Microsoft, right? And most of that is an artifact of two things. Microsoft is trying to dominate the world, and two, the number of hot fixes and KBs and device drivers and all of that stuff, and because Microsoft also owns your operating system, the mass quantity of titles, in a sense, belong to Microsoft as well, even though most of those titles are components in which they're not actually software applications, right? But things like device drivers or hotfixes. These are things that are installed. They are a software title, and it's something that you and the end user will never actually run per se, but they get caught in the entire software hardware inventory drift net, and so they show up. And so, yeah, we'll click on these, and just to show you here that, taking a look at, let's say, the desktops, you can actually click on the desktops here and be able to identify things. Now, we will access a view into these into these devices. Now, let me just click on this here. This is going to look familiar from a software perspective, but this is a particular device. We will absolutely ID the hardware elements that are licensing specific. Now, keep this in mind from a security and a data privacy perspective, is that we do not obtain the MAC address, the IP address, or things like the amount of RAM or the amount of hard drive space or the NIC card. What we're doing is simply picking up the hardware elements that are essential for salmon licensing, such as the make, the model, the number of cores, the CPUs, and you'll notice that the purchase date there, it's actually, well, we probably don't use the right word. It's not purchase date, it's more like birth date. Since we understand that you have, in this particular case, a Pentium 4 CPU, 1.80 gigahertz, we know that that particular brand of Intel CPU came out, yes, August 27th. So it's not that you bought it on August 27th, but chances are, kind of like hamburgers, Intel sells the CPUs while they're still hot off the press, delivered to Dell or HP or Lenovo, and within a matter of a month or two or maybe three, somebody has bought them. So what we're doing here as far as the birth date is concerned is identifying whether or not this computer is old from an age perspective or even from a fiscal write-down perspective. As well, all of the software, both in what we call the streamlined view and the original view. Oh, notice how that's different. Look, there's no publishers, there's no versions. This is the original view. If you were to take a look at the software that came from your network management tool or your device inventory tool, this is what you'll see. What we do in the background, we clean it all up, in which we properly identify the publisher, apply licensing categories, and actually clean up the name as well.
Yeah, and that's pretty cool because I think I saw like Microsoft.NET Framework Security Update in the other one. And so what the tool does is it pulls Microsoft out. It knows that that's a publisher and puts it as a publisher. That's very cool.
Absolutely. So we'll get back to that in a minute. We just got that from taking a look at the dashboard. And I'm just going to go back to the dashboard, the master dashboard here. And that's sort of a side view. And if you're impressed by that, we'll see if we can impress you a bit more. Let's go back to the reports. And now we talked about software streamlining or software normalization. I'm going to show it to you in context that's, well, in context. So I'm going to take a look at what I call the ugly reports. Now, this is like a phone directory in which we're taking a look at all the software titles that have been identified by vendor. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to make it, we're going to go down to Microsoft. There it is. So there's Microsoft, right? You click on Microsoft, and what you'll notice is that we are showing software titles, but there's no versions. Right now, there's a lot of them, and things that will look very, very familiar, such as Bing Bar, Bing Desktop, Bing Crosby, and compatibility packs. But let's go to something that we can recognize. Now, keep in mind, remember we said Microsoft has the vast majority. This is why. Hot fixes, all this kind of stuff. Let's see if we can go to, let's say, an Office application. Kind of hard to find, isn't it? Well, if you notice the categories here in the license type, really all we want to do is we don't care about components or free tools or open source. What we really want to see is we want to see the things that are probably business centric. So rather than using the telephone view, what we could do is on the reports perspective, let's just take a look at line of business applications. Now again, here's the vendor names again. I can guarantee that the number is smaller, but I'm going to show you from a Microsoft perspective that all of a sudden we have different things. We have status tools, active syncs. You'll notice that the device drivers, or maybe you haven't noticed, the device drivers are now gone, right? And the software titles, the number of them have been reduced. Now, these are applications that we feel from a functional category perspective have business use. So these are not device drivers. This is not home software. These are not add-ons.
And at this point too, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's licensable, because I can see some things in here that it definitely is. Right.
That's right. Now to go one step further. Now I'm just going to take you up to the top step here. Now of those business applications, I just want to see what is auditable. So I'm just going to click on Microsoft Auditable. And what this report does is that we're not going to see the list of other vendors anymore. We're just going to see Microsoft. And we're just going to see the software titles in which, let me just go back here, the license type is auditable, which means that it's either a server license, a single license, a volume license, or otherwise. It's a collection of license types. And again, what I was saying before is that you'll probably spend about 80% of your time in this specific report. And here we go. So now things look incredibly different. You'll see the software titles such as Office Project Professional Edition. Again, no versions yet. Wonder what's happening there. And Office Project along with Office Professional along with Office Project Standard and Visio Professional Standard and Office Outlook are sitting in the Office Applications family. Whereas Office Enterprise, Professional, Small Business Edition, Standard Edition, even the unknown editions are sitting in the Office Suite family. So we've created families and put the product lines inside the families. Now, what are product lines? Product lines are a collection of versions, right? And that's all a version is a specific compile of a product line. So this is how they built Office Project Standard in 2010. That's how they did it in the year 2000, and so on and so on. From a product line perspective, and the reason why we built the product line perspective is for two reasons. One, this is a data framework that we've introduced with the ISO 19770-2 framework. Actually, we happen to be on, Asset Labs happens to be on the ISO-2 working group. So we've delivered the spec and have executed on it. The second thing is because that's how most licensing with Microsoft is executed at the product line level, in which multiple use rights and multiple install rights and downgrade rights are calculated within a collection of versions within the product line. And let's take a look at Office Professional Edition to explain it. Now, notice that I clicked on the product line and something happened on the right-hand side. The service is context sensitive. And before I get too far into the product line, let me explain this a bit. I click on a product line, and on the right-hand pane, I will get information that is specific to the product line. Whereas if I click on the vendor name, such as Microsoft, the information changes again. What we just happen to be seeing here is what is called the entitlement cost exposure, in which all of the product lines are shown on the screen. If there's any licensing applied, you can go into it, and it will actually calculate more or less the cost risk associated with being not properly licensed. But let's go back to Office Professional Edition. Whoops, my apologies here. And we'll change it again.
I'm just going to ask you a quick question, because I'm assuming this is just based on customer data here, but would the tool pick up the click to run version of Office for Office 365? Because I don't see that one in here.
Good question. Yes, if it's installed.
So I assume this client doesn't have any installed. That's why we don't.
That's
see it. But if they did, it would show up here as Office 365 or whatever.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would. Absolutely. So a little bit of information. Again, this is not licensing. Well, sure, Windows 7 ready. Weirdly enough, Windows 7 is starting to gain acceptance. So there's still many companies that are still on the tail end of XP and moving over to Windows 7. And of course, if it's Windows 7 ready, it's Windows 10 ready. But the jump from XP to 7, which is still now only becoming the predominant operating system in the corporate environment, is still an issue. So we still show the data. And of course, the support dates. In this case, we're looking at, wow, with this is actually demo data. It's real, but it's demo. All of the devices are real, but we've changed the names of the devices so that it can't be tracked back to the original source. But here we're looking at software. This is not unusual, right? But Office 2010 version 14 support ended absolutely on June 15th, 2015. Oh, that wasn't too long ago, wasn't it, right? So we will identify mainstream end of support. Again, this is not a licensing issue, but it does have implications with respect to technology migrations and cost analysis. In other words, if you value the support, the mainstream support capacities of Microsoft, and you might consider moving from 2013 and so on and so on.
And I would assume, so do you have that in the tool for all the Microsoft products? Because I would assume that would be helpful for organizations where maybe for compliance reasons like SOX or whatnot, they're not allowed to run unsupported software, so they could identify it.
Yes, and not only all the Microsoft titles, but many of the Adobe titles and any other vendor that actually has to declare an equivalency mainstream and extended support framework. Funny side note here, you would think that almost all corporate software vendors would do this, but they don't, right? Microsoft, Adobe, IBM, bits of Autodesk, many of these vendors actually offer mainstream support. The reason being is that it was a condition of the US federal government requirement. So yeah, sure, says the US government, we'll buy a couple million Microsoft Offices, but we want a 5-year mainstream support and a 10-year extended. So they got the leverage to ask it, and so Microsoft has baked it in. But other vendors who don't necessarily engage with large-scale customers or government customers in that context, other vendors don't necessarily have a mainstream support or an extended support. And so this could be, as an example, if I'm getting, let's say, Corel's WinZip, right? Or Corel Draw, or Camtasia from TechSmith. Both all fantastic applications, but basically don't participate in the same context with the US government like Microsoft and Adobe and IBM does. Therefore, they don't need to maintain a 5- and 10-year support system. So other vendors may not have this, right? But the main focus here is Microsoft, Adobe, and these other major vendors. They have them, we support them, and we research it diligently.
Perfect. Excellent.
Yeah. So inventory data, that's fine. Licensing information. This is where what you're seeing here is the entire framework of all of the Office Professional versions from day one. Version 3, version 5, version 7. We're talking mid-20th century here. You know, Office 97, that probably came on floppy disks, 3.5 floppies. In fact, I know they do because I actually still have the box. And it's a huge box. It's 3 feet wide. All right, so
it was probably 20 discs back in the day. So
exactly.
I noticed something interesting here because I see that you've assigned 1,800 licenses like they own Office 2016. But if I look on the left over there, it says Office Pro 1805. And I don't see any shortfalls of licenses. In fact, it says this client is compliant. Can you explain to me what's going on here?
Yep. And so I'm going to have to scroll the screen because we picked a fantastic legacy title here, right? So you'll notice that the effective deployment count on the bottom says 1,800, which I'm going to sort of wiggle over here. But yet the actual inventory count is 1,805. Did we miss 5? Yes, and intentionally. There are, and let me show you here. I got to go into the devices in order to do this. And we're actually loading up 1,805 separate installs.
So this is a list of those 1,805 that have Office Professional installed.
Okay. Exactly. So this is not a list of the devices. Well, you're going to see device information here. These are the lists of the installs of Office Professional Edition on the devices. What do I mean by that? Well, let's turn this thing backwards. I'm just going to flip the production state over here. Hold on here, one moment. There we go. Now, there's a, do it again. Hold on.
I think you double clicked on it there.
Yeah, I think I did too. So what the heck is production state? Well, production state is a tag, like a hashtag that we use within the service. It started off to identify whether or not this install of SQL Server was a disaster recovery, hot backup, cold backup, or otherwise. And otherwise meaning I don't need to count this, right? This is not part of my effective deployment count, or what Microsoft calls the EDP, effective deployment position. But what we also did is that, Microsoft offers you usage rights underneath volume license agreements where you can, well, one of them is downgrade rights, and the other is multiple install rights. And what we found is that some devices may have more than one version of a product line installed. Now, if you're a developer, that's almost inherent because you probably have Visual Studio 2010, 2012, 2014, and you have to keep each version because what you don't want to do is with your old piece of software code is upgrade it, right? You just want to keep it in the corner. And then again, some marketing people may want to keep a copy of, let's say, PowerPoint 2007 for a specific reason, or even if you have an Access.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, right. Access is probably better, right?
Yeah.
So to explain it, let's just go into this device right here. I have no idea what this one is, but let's take a look. So here's a streamlined, all the streamlined title. Here's Office Professional Edition XP 2002, blah, 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 right? What I'm going to do here is actually start typing in Office Pro. Now, so what I'm saying is,
got it on there twice.
Yeah. So yeah, sure. So it looks as if, well, absolutely, it's not look. It is that Office Professional Edition 2010 Pro Plus version 14 is probably being the predominant application, but for reasons we don't know, and it doesn't matter. But for some specific reason, there is a second install of XP. It's 8 years older. It's version 10, right? It's sitting there as well. Now. There's nothing wrong with an operational perspective, but from a licensing perspective, you do not want to count that XP because it's covered. Right?
Not to poke holes in it, but I know the Microsoft SAM process that they go through. This is just a little tip to the viewers today, is that the tool that Microsoft uses will count this twice. So they're actually overinflating your positions. This is one of the great things about Asset Labs, is that because it recognizes the rules of licensing, right? And in this case, that Office Pro 2010 allows you to also have an install of Office Pro XP, not Office Standard. If it was Office Standard, it'd be licensable. But because it's Office Pro, it's not, and they sort of automatically. The customer didn't go in and do anything, right? Like the tool automatically recognize this and knock the one out and call it a VL non-candidate, so that
Yeah.
from a licensing perspective, it knows the tool is smart enough to know it doesn't need to be licensed.
Yeah, and if that Microsoft tool ever fixes it, and of course I'm sure they probably will one day.
Well, they won't, because they're getting revenue.
Yeah, well, conspiracy theories aside, what's more important to us is the audit trail. Is that this is a proof of no, it's like no, Mr. Auditor, or no, Mr. Executive, says the SAM crew. We only have to pay for 1,800, not 1,805, because of these conditions. Yeah. So we think that's just as important, is to prove the VL non-candidates, right? So that's just one of the little things that we do in the background here. And just by showing it here, when you actually drill down to what we like to call the device dog tag, and take a look at the blue is, keep in mind, we always are keeping the focus of being on Office Professional Edition, right? You're able to actually go in here, change the production states if you so wish, look for things, and so on and so on, right? You kind of get to a sort of a micro view here, almost voyeuristic, but you're able to actually be able to identify everything that's on that device. Anyway, so that's how we went from 1,805 on the raw inventory to 1,800 in the licensing.
Yeah, so can you do me a favor? Let's show the viewers how easy this is, right? So let's go back into licensing. Let's remove the 1,800 licenses, because it looks like this account had them signed. Let's say that's 0.
Right. So now keep in mind, I am an administrator in the account, and there will be a few administrators as well for customers who also have the account. But there are also guest levels. Now, this function is not available at the guest level, and the guest level can
only an administrator can change license counts, is what you're saying.
Yes, so. And the guests can be service desk people, because this is a fantastic identifier of finding, as an example. Well, let me do this. Let me say that.
Well, no,
okay, let's put it in. Let's put it in the numbers.
Steve, let's assume there's an EA customer that has 1,800 licenses in their EA. So they'd have 2016. So let's plug 1,800 back in up there.
Okay, well, I'll do it down here then. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And so let's click update. And so what I find interesting here is everything went from negative to 0. What's the tool doing? Like, it looks to me like it knows that a 2016 license can cover 2010, and it's cascading down.
Yes, it is cascading down. In fact, what I'll do is I'll show it by adding an extra 5, right? So what it's doing here is a series of cascading waterfalls or pools. So if you can imagine 1,805 being a pool of licenses, or a pool of water that has a volume of 1,805, and below it, right, are holes of the depth of 1,574, 2, and 224, right? And so it keeps spilling until the holes are filled. So 1,805 is going to spill down at first down to 224. And then if there's anything left, it'll then spill to 2, and then it'll spill to 1,574. Now, you can do this with, of course, what's going to happen here is that you probably just you just didn't purchase 1,805 today and had nothing before. I'll bet you that you probably bought, and without buying software assurance, bought 200 licenses that you decided not to upgrade at the 2010 level, right? Update that. So now with the 200, look what happened.
Yeah. And so that of course is assuming I don't have an EA, because if I do, all my devices need to be licensed. But if I was running license only, what you're saying is, if I have historic entitlements, this client's now got free licenses of 205 that the 205 that they require. They don't need to buy, because they've got them sitting there ready to be consumed, right? So
exactly. Now this as well could be at what I'll call the 2013 level. Let me just explain a concept here from a service desk perspective. So now, of course, you can't buy Office Professional 2013, right? But let's say somebody needs a new office. Now, as a service desk, you've got two choices. You can either buy new or deploy what you have, right? And you may have some entitlements at the 2016 level, but let's say they're all consumed. In this particular case, what you do recognize is that you still have 205 entitlements at the 2013 level. So at least from a service desk perspective, it empowers the service desk people to either go, okay, no, we got to buy the 2016 because of a feature, or, you know, that's good enough. If all this customer is doing or the end user is doing for the next 3 months is classic spreadsheets and Word documents, my gosh, 2013 more than covers it, right? So it enables them to basically, in a sense, harvest entitlements that may be under the surface of the latest and greatest.
Well, and I would think for a product like Visio or Project, that would be super powerful, right? Because a lot of the time they don't need 2016. They call in the help desk, they order it. But if they looked and said, well, we got a 2013, do you really need that functionality? You know, so I think, you know, this really gets powerful when you get outside of Office, which is one of those enterprise products of that EA. But, you know, for Project Visio, I mean, if you're not in an EA for Office, this is very powerful. One of the other things I wanted to just look at here is, can you just scroll down to the Windows Desktop OS for a second for me here?
Yes. Actually, before we do that, just wanted to show you one thing. Now, notice that we have 205 for previous licenses, 0 for current license, and a count of 1,800. That automatically gets reflected in the macro view, right? So you may not be service desk, but this is the SAM manager view, right? Because the SAM manager may not be the person allocating the licenses, but he is accountable for them.
Right. So basically what this is saying is that they're sitting on 205 excess licenses now that we've assigned their licenses.
There they go.
They have a street value of about $106,000. So
yeah, more or less, probably less, but you're looking at the same magnitude. So you've got 106,000 licenses that you're not using.
Yeah, so they could save that over time and as they add new, right? So very cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's go back. Let's just go take a look at the Windows Desktop OS for a second, if you don't mind.
Okay. Well, actually, I'm going to see if I can find it down this way as well. So here's Windows Professional Edition. Now we could actually also, from the inventory view, take a look at it this way. But just for what it's worth, just to show you, is that from a SAM perspective, you can very quickly get to the licensing harvesting page very, very quickly from the SAM view. But let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at it. From this perspective, you get it.
Yeah, and I came here for a reason, right? Because if we looked at that client, I think for Office they had 1,824 total installs, right? 1,800 licensable on the Pro. Here they have 2,075 Windows desktop OSs, right? Not necessarily licensable, right? But they have, you know, 2,075. So they got 1,181 on the enterprise. What do they got on Pro that's licensable?
893, almost 900.
Okay, so they got about, so there are 2,100 devices, let's say, right? So this client actually in an enterprise agreement would need to have 2,100 licenses for Office unless they were exempt through some profile or line of business clause. And that's, you know, great. Another great example of is when you're doing your true ups each year, so many people struggle to figure this out. And this tool makes it so simple, right? Because I can go and I can look here. I assume that all the work has been done, like virtual ones are taken out and things like that. And so if I count it, I can figure out what my licensable OS is, knowing that that's my count each year and that's my true up, right? And so, you know, not only can you look at this from a licensing perspective per se around how many licenses do I have, but if I'm in an enterprise agreement and I have 2,100 desktops that are on Windows and only 1,900 that have Office installed, but I'm paying for 2,100 Offices, I have an opportunity to optimize that in my renewal, right? And reduce my count by 200 because I'm not using them if we can figure out a way to justify that using, say, a line of business clause. So these are really great things that are just, you know, put power in the, you know, the fingertips, so to speak, of people once they get how simple this is and how visual this is, right?
Absolutely. And just to keep going on that, this looks like a licensing tool, and it is, but it's more than that. What we're just seeing here is a specific inventory that we put in for May 17th, 2017. That was just a funny combination. So, but this demo, what it doesn't show very well, because we didn't put a second data set in, is that the customer can maintain a persistent data in stream on a, let's say, weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly level. And the neat thing here is that once you put in, or you or your administrator put in the entitlement values, it floats. And so what you're doing at the very end is making, going back to here, making all these red numbers go away, right? By persistently reconciling on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly level, based upon well, let's say quarterly as well. Desktops hurting cats, right? So maybe you want to do it bi-weekly or monthly. At the back office or data center levels, well, those are elephants, right? And you're probably fine doing those monthly or even quarterly. So there are different inventory frequencies that we'll all assist with. But by doing it persistently, you've created a steady state. Right. In which sooner or later, what you're going to do is that these red numbers, this is a bad example. You're going to have a very small variation in under deployment or over deployment, and then what's going to happen is steady state is fine, and the only thing that's going to catch your eye are punctuations. Like all of a sudden, 15 more Office Visios approached. What the heck happened, right?
Right. Or
and so,
if I have all my licenses assigned in here, and let's say this client was compliant, I think what you're saying is if we put in another inventory 4 weeks from now, we'll see the changes up and down. And so if they came here and they were compliant 4 weeks ago because they had all their licenses signed in here, and then all of a sudden they start seeing reds, they're going to know those are because of net new deployments, and they can figure out, do we need the budget for those? Is there something that we should have done differently? So they can go in and start looking at that stuff proactively versus waiting until their anniversary date and getting themselves in trouble. Right?
Exactly.
The other thing that I'd like to point out as well is that by doing, say, desktop inventory on a monthly basis by this, which Method 180 and Asset Labs all have an offering around, you can stay compliant with Microsoft's language that says you need to true up to the maximum number during the term very easily, just by putting your inventory in once a month, and we can keep the history and figure out what that maximum number was. But we can also keep it under control. If there was reasons where maybe somebody put a wrong image out there and something showed up, you can go and correct it before it's a problem, right?
Yes. And speaking of control, the customer is in control of the data, right? So this is a web service, but none of these numbers get exposed in any way to any other third party other than those that the customer wishes, and only through their interaction. In other words, no, we do not share this data with Microsoft. We do not share this data with the government. And of course, if the customer says get rid of the data, it's all gotten rid of. Because, well, as you were saying, if there's a fluctuation, sometimes these fluctuations are errors, right? If there's an over deploy, if all of a sudden 15 new machines came on, and let's say they, because your developers set up a new proto DMZ or a proto development section, and they weren't identified as developments, right? Then the numbers could be erroneously skewed.
Right. Absolutely.
And so these are the things we got to watch out for. And let me just show you this.
I was just going to say, Steve, like, and I'm going to just make a couple of assumptions because we only got a few more minutes, and I want you to hit on just a couple of other things, but I'm going to make some assumptions that the concepts hold the same for servers, because I saw Exchange and SharePoint, Windows servers, and things like that. So, the same thing, and you can apply states to the dev and test that you were just talking about and things like that. So,
yes.
And I think maybe that's where you were about to go here. So maybe if you want to just
about to go. So let me show you two things. You might be seeing the purchase date and the device state. So we did show you in the software for Office Visio, I believe, or whatever it was, that we could change the production state. And sometimes these production states are automatically calculated because you have the usage rights, right? When you're calculating these usage rights. Here, and that's just for the software, not on the device where it was, but just the software. So as an example, SQL Server could have backup rights or disaster recovery rights, but another piece of software on that same device won't have those rights. So that's as an software specific on that device. Here, we just started here at the very beginning. This is the device states. This is where we go, no. Everything on this device that is a Microsoft application is covered underneath my MSDN. So if you click on Development MS, it means every single piece of software relevant underneath an MSDN package will automatically be exempt. It's like a bulk function.
Oh, very cool.
Right? Versus development everything versus no, we're decommissioning versus no, this is not my machine. This belongs to a third party, and so on and so on. So we have the ability to bulk declare a device as being exempt from being part of the effective deployment count, and also at the software state. And then one last thing I just wanted to show you. This is a fun one. I'm going to go back to Microsoft Auditable here. And just to show you this is, again, this is without, let's just take a look at, well, let's Office Professional Edition. Now, this could have been Windows operating system, but there's a nice high number here. Taking a look at the devices, you'll notice the history tab. If we had history, it would actually show the variations and deviations of the historical count of all of the versions, right? So you could actually watch your versions wax and wane over time. But this is kind of the fun thing to leave it off here. This is what we like to call death clusters. So remember we said that we were able to spot that that particular device was probably built August 21st, 2001, and so on. Well, when you add them all up, right, and if the devices are physical, of course, we actually can take a look at your entire spectral age of all of your devices and look for what were purchase events and are now basically death events. So here's, halfway in 2005, this customer bought almost 350 devices and a few more, and then basically it looks like they almost replaced them 5 years later, right? And they probably had a little bit of a growth spurt and so on and so on. We originally did this for SQL Server because if people were upgrading to SQL Server 2016, it's no fun driving Corvette software on Chevette hardware, right? So, if you're going to be moving to 2016 or even considering moving to 2012, then there's an impetus to consider your hardware as well. So we were looking for hardware-software mismatches, but then we figured, oh my gosh, this works at the desktop level too. So, and so, if there was, this is, what we're looking for here is patterns. So maybe, maybe it's time to purchase again, but it looks as if, well, 86% of these devices are beyond 6 years.
Looks like these guys do a great job of extending the life of their hardware.
Boy, did they ever. Boy, did they ever. But what this now means is that most of these devices can be moved from department to department or even retired without the notion of a department or budgetary write-down. Right? So if this was a server and if you were moving it from one department to another, or if you were retiring it, which is effectively removing it from the books, if it doesn't have all of its book value consumed, such as those that might be 2 to 4 years or 0 to 2 years, then your CIO is going to come in and give you a headache in explaining fiscal write-downs. Right. And that's the last thing that you want.
Yeah.
Right. So you don't want to throw away a machine that might be 1, 2, 3, or 4 years old because it may actually cause some damage with respect to your internal budgetary department budgets.
Very cool.
Just a little side thing.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Steve. I really appreciate you taking the time today to show us the Asset Labs tool. We're big fans of it here at Method 180, and if anybody has any questions at the end here, we'll just throw up Steve and my contact information. Feel free to reach out to either of us. So thanks again, Steve. So thanks, Steve. I think that was an excellent session. I think our listeners would have got quite a bit out of that today. We just wanted to, before we let you go, just talk about a couple of real quick special offers that we have. One is that, although not quite related fully to Asset Labs and the SAM Compass process, but if you do have questions on that and want a demo more specific to you, just let us know. But we are hearing a lot of people looking for help with the conversion from Windows Server processor licenses to cores and trying to understand the cost associated with that change and how to deal with grants. So we here at Method 180 have a special offer for you today that if you go to method180.com/windows-server-offer, we're offering a special on just doing a Windows Server assessment to figure out how the cores impact you, or how the core transition could potentially impact you. Also, we've got a free copy of my audit book. If you want to, you can go to method180.com/audit-book and download a copy of my audit book. That actually has a lot of relevance to what we were talking about today. So anyways, thank you for attending today. And like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself, Mike Austin, Mike at method180.com, or Steve O'Halloran at Asset Labs, Steve at assetlabs.com. Thank you.